Hi, this is Paul. Today's October 4, 2021. That's the day I'm recording this. And this morning I posted the video that I made about the boy crisis and the marriage crisis. And what I often do when I post a video in the morning is I will sometimes write a sort of a Twitter summary of that video on Twitter. And because Twitter is very fleeting, I will often take that and post it on my Substack. And you can find the link to the Substack down below. Those of you who don't have time or desire to watch all my videos, one easy way to sort of keep tabs of what I'm talking about is to subscribe to the Substack, because it's at this point I haven't monetized the Substack at all. It's all free. So you can just go ahead and subscribe, and you'll basically get little Twitter summaries of some of the ideas in some of the videos I'm making. That's because for many of you, you don't have time to watch all the videos that I make, which is absolutely fine. Often what happens, though, when I go into that process is I'll think more about the subject of the video. In this particular video I made last week, Thursday, I think. Wednesday or Thursday. I think last week, Wednesday, actually. So there's a little while between. I had other things stacked up, so I didn't need it last week for the channel. So then often I'll sort of go back and continue to ruminate on my thoughts of the video, and my thoughts will usually continue to develop and progress and to gel from the video. And I actually find writing little Twitter summaries or little Substack summaries helps sort of cement ideas. And then, because Twitter is the way it is, I'll get feedback from some of you, and you'll usually say, hey, well, what about this guy? What about that guy? And then I'll look at some of those things. So it's, again, if you watch my intro to the channel video, this is all part of the learning process for me. So then I was watching, I went over to Kevin Samuel's channel. I'd found his channel a few months ago, and we'll talk a little bit about his channel in this video. But then I had a thought, and what I often do with Twitter is I tweet my thoughts, for better or for worse. Not always in my own best interest, but this is what I tweeted. Part of the deceit of some forms of feminism is that women believe heightened masculine types of status would give them all that it gives to men, and it does not. And I first thought, do I dare tweet this? It's a tweet. So yeah, I did. And I said, okay, I'm looking to hide in an undisclosed location. I expect to find heavily read books by heavily read books from Carl Jung and a bunch of beef jerky and said undisclosed location. No benzos, please. And so I'm going to try and distill this into what will fit into the title of this video, because I think this is actually a huge issue right now in the ongoing struggle between men and women, which is perennial. It doesn't go away. I don't know that it will ever go away in this dispensation, but we have to talk honestly about these issues, because the boy crisis, the marriage crisis, these things are causing a huge amount of suffering in people's lives. So I want to talk more about this. I'm going to take apart this statement, because I know especially some of my friends to the left are not going to be happy with this statement, but I've been making them unhappy for the last 3 years, so some I'm sure have written me off, but I want to get into this. Now, I debated a lot about whether or not I'd use the word feminism and how I'll use it, so I'm still not sure how I'm going to use it for the title of this video. It's a very clickbaity word, but it is part of it. Now, having said that, with many issues like feminism and gay liberation and anti-racism in the country, a big part of the problem of that dynamic is that the winners can't take yes for an answer. And that's been a huge issue with feminism. I know very few men today. I know some, but I know very few men today who aren't, generally speaking, happy about many of the changes that have happened in the West over the last 100 years in terms of women's rights. Their legal rights, their access to high-paying jobs, their access to education, changes in terms of roles within marriage. There have been tremendous changes over the last 100-plus years. Women's lives have been tremendously disrupted by technology, as have men's. Women have had the opportunity to do a lot of transformation in our cultural space. And I think a lot of that has been good. But like pretty much all changes, there's good and there's bad. There's winning and there's losing. And they almost always really go together. Most of the people I know have zero problem with women doing many things in church, maybe not all for some of you, but for many of you all. Women in the workplace, women having their own money and being less dependent on men for money. That's a huge issue when it came to really the uptick of divorce in the 1970s. In many ways, feminism won, and it can't take yes for an answer, which is why in my tweet I said some feminists, because people who identify as that are all across. The definition of feminism is as fraught as the definition of racism. It doesn't mean that misogyny doesn't exist. It just means that these terms are deeply conflicted and get very fudgy quickly. So hence the use of the word feminism. Now, masculine and feminine descriptions. I have to confess that before a few years ago, I thought very, very little about what masculinity and femininity were. I just didn't think much about it. It's sort of progressivist feminism that has forced me into thinking a lot more about this. And again, I recommend Queens and Court Jesters with Jonathan Peugeot, where Jonathan and Andrea and Mercury, I thought, had a really good discussion about some of these issues. Jonathan has taught me a lot about it, and just in terms of thinking symbolically with respect to the masculine and the feminine. And these symbols are very old and they go way back, and there's a degree of consistency to them going back. And again, I never thought about any of this stuff until I started, looking into it. And I was forced into it by the discussions that are going on today. If you push a difference, you make the difference salient. And that's a big issue with a lot of people who are highly progressive right now in terms of social constructionism. They are pushing these issues, and this is a big issue in race today. You make something salient, people will see it, and they will see some of the things you want them to see, and they'll see some of the things you don't want them to see. And people keep saying, well, we need to have a conversation. Well, you got the conversation. And part of the way a conversation goes is, you might hear some things you like, and you might hear some things you won't. But you asked for a conversation. You made everybody focus on this stuff, so here we are. Let's do it. Here's the difficulty. You cannot both promote a difference and abolish its importance at the same time, which is what I see people doing all over the place with issues of gender today. They are both promoting the difference, and they're saying we need to have a conversation, we need to pay attention to it, and then some are trying to abolish the difference at the same time. The sexual binary is not going anywhere. It isn't. It just isn't. And now we're all talking about it, and so we're going to learn some things, and we're going to learn some things that we like, and we're going to learn some things that we don't like. So buckle up, boys and girls. Let's get on the roller coaster. Now, Jonathan Peugeot has done a number of videos, which this is what part of his Clips channel, how modern movies undermine the feminine. And I think he's dead on right about it. And you can watch the bigger video that he has of this too. Now, we're not talking about male and female here. You have to think about masculine and feminine in terms of male and female on a bell curve. Generally speaking, males are more masculine than females, and vice versa. But these are two bell curves, and they're sort of overlapping. So you can always find a woman that is more masculine than a man in some respects, and a man that is more feminine than a woman in some respects. And that's the way this kind of language works. And so we have to recognize that from the outset, that that masculine and feminine is not identical to male and female. Now, at some point, I want to get a lot deeper into the rise and fall of Mars Hill, and these issues are all over that in many ways, and we'll get into that when we do. Filling masculine social tropes with women elevates the masculine above the feminine and undermines the feminine. And we've seen a ton of that in much celebrated movie progress and representation over the last number of years. You can find it in older movies, but when the woman, if you want a lesson in this, go watch the Critical Drinkers channel. He loves pointing it out. If the woman always has to beat up the man, if the woman always, but the point is she's using masculine traits. And what this does is it undermines feminine power. And again, the link below to Peugeot's video, the clip is only about 8 minutes long. You'll get the sense of it. It's a great clip. I won't play it now because many of you have already seen it, and I don't have to really go on too much about this. Our culture has been doing this for a while, and here's the thing. You don't pump this kind of stuff into the zeitgeist without consequences. And consequences for men, consequences for women, consequences for boys, consequences for girls. There's a lot of, partly because so much of our imaginative calibration is now being mediated by television and movies, people are just unaware of a lot of physical differences. I've told this story before. I remember when my oldest son was 13 and, I was talking to my wife about some security issues around the house. And one of the things we were looking at it would be a, one of those security doors. And my wife basically said, well, if there was someone at the door and I opened the door and I wanted to close it, I'll just close it on him. So now I weigh about 100 pounds more than my wife. My son at that point was about 13 years old. He was in great shape. He was playing basketball and football, but he wasn't as big as he is now, but he was getting there. So he wasn't by any means 100 pounds more than her. So I asked him, I said, you go stand outside the door, you open the door. And I just told my son, just force your way into the house. Didn't have any trouble at all. My wife is really quite a fit, strong woman, but she's only 5'6", 100 and I better be careful here. This is just a reality about men and women. We are bigger and stronger, generally speaking. In a fist fight, women will lose. I remember a number of years ago, back when there were a lot of stories, especially about football players physically abusing their girlfriends. Some of these incidences were on videotape by security cameras. And I remember watching a bunch of them. And in many cases, the woman hit the man first. And then he hit her second. Now, that gives no excuse to the man for hitting the woman. But she shouldn't have hit him. And he still shouldn't have hit her, because obviously what all of us know is for a woman to hit a man usually is not a big deal. But you have these college and professional football players hitting a woman who is usually, less than 150 pounds. It's hugely consequential. And they were rightfully, brought up on charges for assault. But these are realities with us, and they don't go away no matter how much social constructivism and representation you have in the movies. And I think Peugeot is exactly right. What you are actually undermining is the feminine, and you are actually disempowering the kind of feminine power that women have in the culture. And what you're also starving is the kind of imagination for women to use feminine power in the culture. And women need feminine power because men have masculine power. And as a culture, we have greatly prioritized masculine power over feminine power. And if women are going to compete with men in terms of masculine type status and power, women, for the most part, are going to lose simply because of the overlapping bell curves. Now, I want to talk about women in ecclesiastical leadership, and this is a fraught conversation in the Christian Reformed Church. I've touched on it before. Anybody who knows my reputation in the Christian Reformed Church or has known me knows that I have never been against women serving in all offices of the church. I inherit this belief from my parents, and I continue to maintain it today. I have, if you go back through the Livingstone Sermon Archive, you will find women preaching. If you ask around, you will find women that I have helped get into seminary and helped process these kinds of ideas. And so when the Calvin Seminary Forum comes out, they had to be really careful with their words, commemorating. They probably didn't want to say celebrating, but many would have liked to see them do this. I know many of the women on the cover there personally, and they are wonderful women. Now, there's a lot of really sloppy talk about women in leadership. If women were in charge, there wouldn't be wars. Queen Victoria, Queen Elizabeth. Women have been in charge less than men, considerably less than men, in terms of formal positions of usually masculine social structures for hundreds and hundreds of years. And there have been wars and colonization and oppression of women, etc., 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 etc. People are overplaying their hand with respect to these kinds of claims. Announced that female leadership would be an upgrade. Maybe, probably among some things, but not among others. And once you make that claim, you are admitting that there is a difference, that men and women are going to lead differently. When I was get your bingo cards out, when I was a missionary in the Dominican Republic, most churches have the dama misionera. And that was usually a high-status woman who had responsibility within the church. Now, those churches would not have imagined a woman pastor, but the dama misionera taught Sunday school, preached, did a whole bunch of leadership things, and nobody thought a thing of it. And we've seen this in the church for a very long time. Now, my particular stance about women in church office goes back to the book of Acts and the story of Lydia. You can debate that if you want to, which is fine, but especially in Protestant churches, and the difference between Protestant churches and the Catholic and Orthodox with respect to the entire conceptualization of the worship service, of the church hierarchy, of all of this is different. So particularly in Protestant churches, I don't think women should be barred from serving in ecclesiastical office. That's my take. Now, I don't have any problem working with people who are complementarians that don't believe in this. I think we should have the conversation. I think it's a good thing to debate, and I actually think it's healthy in Protestant land that we have churches on both sides of the aisle here, because over large periods of time, we will see and we will get a pretty clear idea about what really are some of the differences between men in leadership, formal leadership, and women in formal leadership. And I think in the Christian Reformed Church, we've had these changes now for, is it 25 years? Of course it's 25 years. I'm looking at the article. We've had these changes for 25 years, and patterns have developed. Now, of course, all patterns are within a context, and that context will, of course, impact the pattern making, but the patterns are there. And some of the patterns we like, some of the patterns we don't like. For the most part at Livingstone's, I really like having, if we have, I really like having at least one man as an elder and one man as one woman as an elder and one man as a deacon and one woman as a deacon, because in terms of the life of the church and the kind of ministry they need to do, women are really good at some things that men really aren't at. And that doesn't mean that women aren't able to do it if they're not in ecclesiastical office, but the women on our council have been a tremendous help in the life of the church, I believe. I would have no problem having a woman co-pastor on staff at Living Stones. We don't have that much staffing here, but I would have no problem with that. But I know that I would bring different things to the table than what she would. And I know for a lot of you who are Roman Catholic or conservative Protestant, you disagree with me on that. That's absolutely fine. I think part of being an adult, part of love, is loving each other even within and despite our differences. So this is one that comes up in the channel fairly often, and you can make your complaint down in the comments section and it will be noted. But now, if you announce that female leadership, I should say leadership instead of headship, because that, I don't want to get into that whole conversation, would be an upgrade, you have to admit that it's different. And that makes it difficult to complain about that if outcomes are not equal or certain metrics are undesirable. And I've seen that in the CRC. Women complain that they don't get called as often for senior pastor positions as men. And I think there's a real issue of masculinity and femininity with respect to some of those issues. And I'm not surprised by the patterns that we've seen in church leadership in the Christian Reformed Church because of issues about masculinity and femininity. Now, female leadership has never been tried. No, but it's always going to be within a context. And so the debates will be never ending. Men will lead differently from women. One of the things I want to touch on this week is this article from Religion Dispatches, which is a critique from the left of the podcast of The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill. And I want to do some reading of that and some critiquing of that. But part of the issue is, well, very few megachurch pastors are women. There was a time when I was much more active in church planting when I know a church that was really working hard, and I've seen this often in church planting, really working hard to recruit women as church planters. They didn't step up. Is this because of you can look at the Jordan Peterson Big Five personality profile. Is this because to be a church planter means to be a risk taker? And for all the upsides and downsides of Mark Driscoll, to be a church planter who plants a megachurch, it's almost always men. Because men are risk takers, much more than women. Women take different kinds of risks than men, but that's just part of our differences. And so these differences in outcome, you want to chalk them up to the patriarchy? I can't stop you, but I really doubt that's actually a major factor in why most founding megachurch pastors are men. Now, I've seen a number of churches that after they have grown under male leadership have brought in female leadership. Willow Creek, of course, did that fairly early. But again, in almost all cases, the driving leadership is men because this kind of risk-taking, this kind of entrepreneurial church leadership in the American context, it's almost all done by men. Now, I read through these articles and I think, anybody going to mention Joyce Meyer? There's a woman who has entrepreneurial leadership of an enormous church movement. And you can find other women through history who have done similarly. Now, you might not like her theology. You might not like what she's doing, but there's a woman. Now, how about in the main line? Well, you'll find high-status women. Nadia Bolz-Weber just elevated to sort of the public face of the ELCA, and she was a church planter, I think. I'd have to check her story. But she's also has a past as a stand-up comic. And when we talk about megachurches, comedy is a huge part of that too. Same with Driscoll. Driscoll would not have had the charisma, the preaching chops, the hits on YouTube and on podcast if it weren't for his comedic instinct. There's lots of stuff going on there. But Nadia Bolz-Weber did not plant a mega church. It was a good-sized church, helped with a lot of publicity as a gifted writer, as a lot of celebrity, but not a mega church. There's reasons why There's differences between men and women, and that is going to play out in, you'll find this in the business world as well. I'm not an expert on that. Other people are. This should come as no surprise given difference between male and female with respect to masculinity and femininity. It's going to play out. What I'm about to play is going to upset some of you. And I hope he's, whenever I play something from another YouTube channel, I'm always a little nervous. I'm going to have to re-edit this video and take it out. But Kevin Samuels, I found him a number of months ago, and there's sort of a Stefan Molyneux aspect to his channel. Okay, it's the truth teller, and people call up. Women call him, and if you've watched any of his videos, you know exactly what he's going to say, because he says it over and over and over and over and over and over again, and the women who call him must want to hear it over and over and over and over and over again. Is it because of the attention? And again, as I wrote on Twitter, and James from my meetup answered back, I want to know the psychological dynamics of people calling up Stefan Molyneux to have him describe just how exactly they're messing up. And Kevin Samuels to do what he does so skillfully to women time and time and time again, which is basically to instruct them in a good bit of reality. Now, again, you might not like the reality, but it is real. And that is what he's doing. That is what he's saying. And it is true. And it is a big difference between men and women and how this plays out in the marriage crisis. So I'm going to stop now before I start playing it, so that if I have to recut this video without this segment, I'll do it. Okay, for those of you who are unfamiliar with him, he basically has sort of a call-in show where people call in, and this is the profile video on his channel, so you can find it. It's one of his more popular videos, and it's just a terrific example of what happens in his channel. And there's so much complex psychology that goes behind both why women want to call him and why men love to listen to this, that I'm not going to get into, because some of it is healthy and some of it is less healthy. But the fact that he is African American and mostly talks to African American women is not incidental either, because many of these dynamics that we are increasingly finding in the broader society in North America have been present in the Black community for a very long time. And so Black men and women know these dynamics, and I am not in the least bit surprised about anything that I hear in this video. And it is not simply true of the African American community. It is also true in other communities in North America. So let's listen. Now, remember the title of this video: Women getting status in masculine ways does not get them what they think it will. And this is a terrific example of that.
Following along, so I've just
First off, let's start with this. What's your name?
My name's Susan.
Hi, Susan. How old are you?
I'm 30.
All right. What you got for me?
So I'm 30 and I have 2 kids. So I'm single. I have 2 kids from a previous relationship. So I was kind of trying to rate myself, but I am still very young, active. I have a lot to offer. I make great money. I have good, well-behaved children, and I am in LA dating. And I just find,
I love that he gets up and walks away. What this means is this dude is kind of a YouTuber like I am. It's like, I make videos, and sometimes if I'm making a long commentary, I have to get up and walk out of the room or do something or answer the door or talk to someone. But I love that he gets up and walks away.
dating in LA is so hard. So I actually don't have a problem meeting what you call high profile men, men or
He's got a problem getting a husband.
Okay, now what does she mean by high-profile men? Now, as I said before, and we're going to get into Chris Williamson's video towards the end of this, where Chris really nicely sort of lays a bunch of this stuff out. What kind of man is she looking for? She is looking for a man who is attractive to her, probably 2 to 4 years older, could even be substantially older than that, has more financial resources than her, treats her well, will be a good stepfather to her children. That is what she's looking for. Obviously. I mean, that is, all of us should know that. And can she find that? Possibly. Women do. But now we're going to have to, probably the best chance she could have would be in church. And she was going to have to settle on some of the scores, which is the kind of thing that he lays on in ways that are so clear.
Yeah, but
Yeah, because you got two kids.
so it's just the 2 kids thing.
No,
like,
it's not just. It's big. I mean, you're 30 years old and all this career stuff. But where? How many different fathers?
1.
Okay. How come you and he didn't get married?
I was so young.
So, she's on a video link or something, so he can see she's a very attractive woman. She's 30 years old. He's just going to say, I'm this height, I'm this weight, I'm very attractive. I have no problem getting dates. And he's like, of course you don't. But a husband?
When I was in that relationship, so I met him when
How
I
old
was
is your
really
oldest
young.
child?
10.
How old is your youngest?
7.
So you were 23. That's
When
not
I
young.
had my daughter, yeah. So my kid's father, he was older than me.
But listen to what I'm about to say. You were younger. You were old enough to make babies.
Yeah.
First one at 20, even though I'm not okay with it, you can let it slide. But the second one, man, that's a choice. Why didn't you?
No, we were in I was with him for 6 or 7 years.
But you weren't his wife. And that's a difference.
Yeah.
So if you'll let me explain it to you, I'll try. You're
Okay.
a woman.
Now again, why does she call? Well, I'm just new to the channel. It's like, you probably should have watched a video or two before you decided to call, but she wants to hear the answer. And again, I thoughts arise in my mind why she would call and have this experience with him. Maybe she just wants to be on the internet. It's a big channel. But again, I want to know the psychological dynamics of this, because I don't, and it's fascinating, frankly.
Woman, let me explain it to you. I'll try. You're
Okay.
a woman that was with a man for 6 or 7 years, and you gave him the highest honor a woman can give any man on the planet. You gave him children. You gave him not only 1, you gave him 2. And yet you did not require him to even bestow the title of a wife upon you. So you go back out into the market, older.
And market is important. And, it's really amazing to me that you can have people who really say, well, I'm against capitalism. Oh, okay. So you're against markets. But I'm all for sexual liberation. Sexual liberation is basically creating a sexual market. Traditional forms of male and female sexuality in the world, there are problems. I'm not going to disagree with that. But it took that out of the realm of the marketplace to one degree or another. What we have now is an open market. And when people themselves are in an open market, bad things happen. So, if you're saying, well, I don't trust markets, don't be a sexual libertarian, because all you're doing is saying, we think the market should decide, and the market's going to make some cruel decisions.
Did not require him to even bestow the title of a wife upon you. So you go back out into the market, older, with 2 children. You expect someone in that market to accept you older and bestow the title of wife upon you? That's how men look at it. Right, wrong, or indifferent. And then being in LA, one of the most competitive markets for women in the world. Competition is stiff out there. I'll be there in a couple of weeks. Beautiful
Well, I
woman on every
wouldn't
corner.
say like so. I do meet great men. I don't think it's hard finding the man to
Okay,
like
okay, man.
be committed to.
Oh, no. See, this is how we judge over here. We don't judge by dealing with dating. We judge in weddings. That's the only thing that counts. If you're not married, you're losing.
Hmm.
See, that makes it real clear because you've had everything up to that point anyway, right?
I've been engaged.
Right. I don't count those either because women, especially a lot of black women, have been engaged for a long time 3, 4, 5 engagements. See, when you make it real clear, there's a high value man or whatever term you're using. Has any one of them married you? And the answer is no. And that's what I say. The dating market is difficult because you're not an unattractive woman. Sure, a guy will take you out for a nice date. You really want to know what we think? How tall are you?
I'm 5'6". I weigh 115 pounds.
Yes. Oh yeah, I'll take you out. Oh hell yeah, I would take you
So I
out.
don't have a problem finding men taking
Of course
me out.
not. I
I've been on
would, but the
great
thing
dates.
is, but what are you finding them for though? Yeah, I would take you out, get you a nice steak and some lobster. We'd have a good old time, and I would blow your back out, but I wouldn't marry you.
See, what I think I really have an issue is like finding men that don't want like the superficial. Like I feel like the type of guys like they just want a woman that like looks good on their arm. Like
Yes.
so like when you
Hold
say
on,
thin
listen. Let me stop,
models,
stop,
I've been
stop,
on
stop,
like
stop, stop,
chubby
stop,
models.
stop, stop, stop right there. Yes, that's what we want because that's who we are. And you want a
Yeah,
man,
that's the problem I have with dating.
but
That's
but
why I don't
listen,
feel like
listen, listen,
oh,
listen.
okay.
That's the problem you have with men. And again, good, bad, or indifferent, this is men.
Listen,
Listening.
you want men not to be men. You want men to think like women. That's not what we value, ma'am. We want a beautiful woman on our arm.
Now remember the bell curve, okay? Not all men, not all women. We're talking the bell curve here, overlapping bell curves.
Yeah,
And,
that's the problem.
well, no, you're the problem.
I'm the
Because,
problem.
yes, you're the problem because I'm telling you what men want. You've experienced what men want and you've got a problem with it. That's your problem. We're not going to change. You're either going to get on board with it or you will die alone.
So what should I be looking for then?
Well, honestly, first you need to get down and understand that.
Why does she call? She calls for advice. But again, if you've watched any of his videos, you know exactly what advice you're going to get. And it's not the advice that got some of that rise and fall of Mars Hill to play on some of this stuff.
You have no leverage. You have no leverage in this matter. It's the men. We control access to relationships. You control access to sex.
Right there. Men control access to relationships. Women control access to sex. Now, again, these are bell curves. These are generally speaking. You've got to understand that in all of this. But what he says right there, if you don't understand that tiny little point, you're not going to understand the dynamic.
Understand that you have no leverage. You have no leverage in this matter. It's the men. We control access to relationships. You control access to sex. You need to understand what a man that you would want, what he would want in a girlfriend, wife, or significant other.
Like a good mother.
No, ma'am. No.
I'm sure the Family Feud episode that played about what men would do for surveyed 100 married men what they would do for sex, and again the men were like die, beg, And the women are like, clean, cook. And like, man, no, 100 married men didn't say any of those things. They'd rather die and beg and kill for sex than clean and cook for. And women are like, what's wrong with you? Well, this is the point. This is how men and women are different. And it's just hard for us.
Good,
No,
like a good mother,
ma'am.
a good
ma'am.
wife.
No, that changes from every man. That changes from man to man. Where's your father?
Oh, I didn't grow up with a mother or a father.
All right. So, due respect, you don't seem to get that men judge the way we judge. And yes, like I said, you have no problem getting men to pay you attention. You've got no problem attracting men, but
Yeah.
getting a man to take you seriously. And would you like to be married?
I would.
Okay, and that's a problem because you're asking a man to become a stepfather. You're asking, let's say you're asking me to come in and take care of one man's child, a man's two children.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't create those. It's all downside. I've been a stepfather. It's a horrible deal.
What about
I
the
don't-
men that have children of their own? They want a stepmother.
Well, again, you still act
Think
as
like
though
most men at this age.
Okay, listen. I'll answer it. See, you're still speaking as if you have leverage in this thing, and I'm trying to level set you. Even if I have children, I got more options than you. I can go find a woman with no kids because I can afford both of you. If I can afford to take care of you and your kids, I can afford to take care of her and no kids.
Yeah.
Why would I pick you and your kids when I know your kids are not going to, I'm not their father. They'll never look at me as their father. I got all the responsibility and none of the upside of being a biological father. Can I discipline those children like they were my own?
They don't need discipline. They're very
See, that's your
grateful.
problem. There you go, right there. She said,
And again, if you're interested in this stuff, there's a whole channel of it. And it's pretty much mostly the same. And it's saying the same thing patiently, calmly to people who, again, does she want to hear this? Does she not want to hear this? Does she want a husband? Does she want, but there it is. Okay, let's be fair to both sides right now. I find some conservative narratives to be insufficient here too. For example, in my last video, I mentioned the marrying young versus marrying later, and got a comment which I fully expected. Someone basically saying, I did marry young and it didn't work. And I've seen that too. I see it regularly. Part of being the pastor of a church of older people means I'm already pastoring people in their second and third marriages. That's a lot easier than being a church planter when you're pastoring people who are going through their first divorces. That is a much more difficult thing. Now you might say, oh, well, people shouldn't divorce. We are looking through a lens which is individualistic, and we are imagining that if you just sort of white knuckle it, you can get through. That's sometimes the case. Tim Keller loves to quote a study that says most people who are having real trouble in their marriage 5 or 6 years later, if they hang in there, they'll sort it out. And that's true, generally speaking. Again, bell curves here. It's not always true. White knuckling it is likely insufficient. It's sort of like saying, I'm going to run a marathon. Okay, you'd better start training, because most of us can't white knuckle a marathon. It can't be done. And part of the thing in terms of working a successful marriage is that there are some huge challenges to it that haven't always been here. Many of them are recognized frequently. Longevity. I regularly meet people who have been married for more than 50 or 60 years. That is an accomplishment. And whenever someone at church says, We're having our wedding anniversary. What anniversary is it? 57. We applaud them. They have accomplished something. Have there been times in their marriage that they wish they weren't married? I'm sure there were. Have there been times in their marriage they wish they married someone else? I'm sure there were. Have they had upsides and downsides in terms of staying in that marriage? Absolutely. Education. Right now, if you're going to succeed in many areas in this country, education, generally speaking, is a vital thing. It is very difficult to manage the education thing and the marriage thing. Now, this has changed considerably. When, for example, my grandfather went through Calvin Seminary, the church had a lot more control over people's lives. It was, you were not allowed to be married and be in seminary at the same time. By the time I went through Calvin Seminary in the 1980s, I was one of the few seminarians who wasn't married. Almost everyone already was married, usually right after college, got married right away, and then started seminary. The romanticization of marriage, that people are picking marriage based on, individuals are picking their own spouses based on romantic love. Again, it's not a horrible thing. Obviously, Jacob sees Rachel and works an extra 7 years for her. It's not a new thing, but in terms of span in the culture, it's a difference from arranged marriages. And so there are a lot of variables in this. And marriage in many ways, in some ways, is tougher than it's ever been. In other ways, not so. Again, there's so many variables with respect to this. Economics are a factor. If you are able to, sort of the stereotypical Leave It to Beaver, Ozzie and Harriet, Huxtables, if you can manage on one income, better, God bless you, better off for it. But there are lots and lots of challenges with respect to this. And so the debate between marrying young and marrying later is a good debate to have. And each of us, if we haven't already decided, or if you're in your 20s, you're going to have to deal with this. Is someone available? Does someone want to marry? What I do know is that the current context of the culture that I talked about in the last one isn't working well. Maybe I should just read some of the stuff that I wrote in my tweet. You can read it all in the Substack. This is what I wrote this morning. In today's video, I talk about the cross between the boy crisis and likely the anticipated husband crisis for high-status women in upcoming generations. I had little inkling of a marriage crisis before I started my Jordan Peterson meetup, but very quickly the participants began to share their stories of the breakdown of of what I call the generational handoff. And we did a video on that, which you can find on my channel. The marriage crisis, the failing intergenerational handoff. There are a number of elements that have contributed to this. Number one, the Christian social pressure against cohabitation and premarital sex that I grew up with is gone, not only for much of the church, but from the society as a whole. A lot of times I don't edit these things, and so there's problems in the text. I should really change that. The widespread damage of children through the divorce of their parents is now 2 generations deep. If you watch the Bachelor shows, the marriage for life hunger is breathless, but seems overly aspirational. They're not setting themselves up well to do it. They sound like someone who wants to run a marathon but has never spent a day in their life training. What it takes to build a lifelong marriage goes beyond good intentions. It takes wisdom, tradition, and community. The new regime in the pursuit of lifelong marriage is an audition culture. First, you audition a potential spouse in bed. One young man told me that the women he sleeps with always seem to be performing rather than connecting. They're auditioning. They're trying to qualify for the role of wife. And a lot of the men, maybe they don't want that right now. And maybe when they're ready, they'll find someone who is in her early 20s who doesn't have any children and wants that and is ready to start. And all of the other women that the man knew will say, "Why didn't you marry me?" "Well, I wasn't ready." One or both parties are saying, the next level of audition is the move in together. This is an open-ended audition comparable to a temp job where you really don't know if it will lead to a permanent position. One or both parties are saying, I like you enough to have sex and act married, but I'm not sure if I like you enough to keep you. If someone better comes along, you might get kicked to the curb. Is it any wonder we are building an anxious generation of young adults? The unreliability of their parents is now producing a pre-marriage ritual of unreliability in the hope that reliability will simply manifest itself, and it won't. In some circles, this has fostered the marry young versus marry late debate. It's a good debate to have. Team marry late makes a good point that these 40 years before can afford wisdom, which can afford better mate selection. Given the overall rapid breakdown of intergenerational wisdom transmission, this makes some sense. A healthy culture affords wisdom to individuals who haven't had time to accumulate it in their biological life. So I talked about the video that I talked about, and I talked about the other video that I stumbled across. I believe the current marriage crisis has a luxury beliefs dynamic. Look at Rob Henderson to learn about luxury beliefs. People privileged with beauty and status will consume those further down the hierarchy, yet even they will struggle with till death do us part. Then you bring in the boy crisis of the Washington Post. Now, Chris Williamson, I mentioned this on Twitter and I tagged him in there and he said, have you looked at this video? And I hadn't. So I looked at this video and it had a lot of the things that I didn't talk about in my previous video. So I wanted to get them in. And he makes some points and then I'm going to step off from one of the points that they make.
Here's the implication, man. So David Buss, father of evolutionary psychology, he wrote in 2015, he wrote about the challenges you have when you have an asymmetry in terms of education between men and women. Okay? Mm-hmm. This is something that he said. Quote, we must look deeply...
Now, before he gets into this, I want to talk to Anselman, one of my favorite commenters, because I know in videos like this, Anselman decries the fact that I'm not making these points from the Bible, or maybe I'm using evolutionary psychology. The reason I do this is because many of those listening who know the Bible and see the Bible as authoritative, I don't need to make this point to them. It's already in the Bible. Now, the Bible's complex on this, and I talked about the sex lives of the patriarchs, but the point there is, if you're already a committed Christian who believes in the authority of Scripture, I don't need to make these points. When you look at what Jordan Peterson said in that recent Telegraph thing, part of why he contributed effectively in terms of, let's call it pre-evangelism, for many was rationality. And for that audience, this evolutionary psychology stuff speaks to them. That's why I have it in my videos.
Education between men and women. Okay? Mm-hmm. This is something that he said. Quote, we must look deeply into our mating psychology to understand the far-reaching consequences of the sex ratio imbalance. So that is when you have a disproportionate number of one sex to another in an area. Women and men have both evolved multiple mating strategies. Some of the gender pursue casual hookups, some committed partnerships, some alternate at different times of their lives, and some do both simultaneously. And although a few social scientists deny the data, research overwhelmingly shows that men harbor, on average, a greater desire for sexual partner variety. Shock. Men
Shock. He's exactly right.
Experience more frequent sexual thoughts throughout the day, have more sexual fantasies involving multiple partners, and readily sign up for online dating sites for the sole goal of casual sex. So a surplus of women among educated groups caters precisely to this dimension of men's sexual desires because the rarer gender is always better positioned to get what they want on the mating market. So what you see in colleges where there is a surplus of women and a scarcity of men is more casual dating because the men get to make the rules. If there are fewer men than there are women, the women have to compete, and the only way that they can compete is by playing the game that the men want. Conversely,
and this is exactly what Kevin Samuels is talking about in Los Angeles. Well, he's going to continue. I mean, Chris is going to make all the points very convincingly and very well.
College, where you have more men than you do women, you have more long-term relationships because the men have to play the game that the women want. A surplus of women amongst educated groups caters precisely to this dimension of men's sexual desires because the rarer gender is always better positioned to get what they want on the mating market. Roll it forward a little bit. You now have 2/3 to 1/3 educated women to educated men. On the whole, women don't want to date a man that is less educated, less rich, and lower status than them, and also one that's shorter than them. You are going to have an ever-increasing group of women competing for an ever-decreasing group of high-performing men. The men that sit below them don't win anything. So there's more incels, there's more underperforming men. White-collar women don't want to date blue-collar guys, and most of the women, even the ones that went to college, they're now competing for this tight group of chads at the fucking super performing rowing chads at the top. And the only ones that win are these fucking turbo weapons, the 9 out of 10 and 10 out of 10 guys that have got
Turbo weapons.
MBAs, the ones who are able to outperform intellectually, socially, and monetarily. The women, they're the only ones that are left that are able to date. So nobody wins except for Chad. Chad fucks.
Wait.
Little side point here. As a pastor, sometimes I have to hand a mic around a conversation. There's a reason you put your mic on a stand. Because people like to gesture with their hands, and if you're holding the mic, he's holding this. It's the same mic I've got. He's holding this mic. Out it goes. See that all the time. Anyway, sorry about that. I just couldn't help but distract myself.
So nobody wins except for Chad. Chad fucks.
Wait. Why does it always have to be okay? But if it's 2-1, all you have to do is make it into college, and you got 2-1 odds, baby.
That's it.
That's not hard. Getting into Texas A&M is not hard. You and I could right now take whatever test necessary and get into Texas A&M. Sorry, I apologize to anyone. That's probably not true. I think it's actually a pretty prestigious school. Let's say
You're
like
saying
LSU.
that because you live there and you don't
State.
want to be berated by them on the street.
No, okay. Let's do Louisiana State. I've heard from people LSU. You just have to sign your name on a few tests and they'll let you in. That's what I've heard from people who have gone to LSU, mind you. I'm not. This is okay. So what I got from this, and why I was smiling while you were talking, and I didn't want to interrupt, but I did at some point, was all you have to do then in 10 years from now is just go to college, and the babes are going to come at you.
Here's one for you, man.
Okay, but see, I wanted to get through that whole college thing because now we have to ask the question, because sort of with Kevin Samuels and the dating market and men want hookups and all that, they do, but how long do they want them? I mean, after they have had, just saw someone come by the door, was ready for the knock. After they have had 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 partners. And some women will be like, it's not unusual. After they've had dozens of partners, what do they eventually begin to want? I've talked to a number of men like this who have had huge sexual histories, and they say to me, who has not had a huge sexual history at all, I'd rather have what you have. You'd rather have what I have. And they're not talking about my smoking hot wife. I've just Mark Driscolled myself. I'd rather have what you have. Wife, family, commitment, children. Why? What do we really want? Do we really want just one thing? Well, let's keep listening a little bit more.
The difference in right swipes on Tinder for a guy with a master's degree versus a bachelor's degree is, I want to say 90% more. So you get 90%.
Are you kidding me?
90% more right swipes if you've got
I've got a master's degree.
a master's degree versus
I've never been on Tinder, and I hope to never be. I don't think I'll ever be on Tinder. That sounds horrible to me. That sounds absolutely horrible.
a bachelor's degree on Tinder. This is
I'll
in
tell you
John
right
Burgess.
now-
Anyone that wants to fact check me, this is in John Burgess' Dateonomics.
I honest to God, I'll tell you right now, I don't understand women. I just don't, not in the
Women don't understand men. Men don't understand women. It's true.
sense of like, oh, I don't understand them, they're stupid. It's like, no. Like, I literally thought that I might have an inkling of an understanding of what a woman
90%.
wants and what a woman thinks.
90%.
I don't.
Stick about for 1 year. So if you've got your bachelor's degree and you think, do I want to stick about and do this master's? That, look, man, it's a year of your life. It's going to be a bit expensive. You're going to have to work hard. But dude, 90% better conversions on Tinder for the rest of your life. That's what they should put on the enrollment thing. Fuck the course. Doesn't matter about the course. You get to have 90% better conversions on Tinder.
Dude.
Okay. But is that what you're really going to want? Does that help you in the long run? Well, you might think, well, and then we're back to where we were with some of the video that having lots of sexual partners, does that really help me get what I want? Well, what do I want? Well, what do I want? That is not a simple question. So another video that folks have been sending to me is Michaela. Does she keep her last? Does she still have her? It's Michaela Peterson still, isn't it? I guess it's good for business. I don't know what her legal name is. Anyway, she's moved down to Nashville. She's getting set up in her studio. She's got her podcast going, and she had an interview with her father. Her father jumped in on that with the Freedom Tunes guy. This guy does an astoundingly good impression of Jordan. I've watched a couple of those videos. Again, the political right versus left thing just really doesn't turn me on. But Michaela, of course, has, she's lived, thanks, Dad, for the fairly public life. At least she can get a, social media career out of it. I mean, she's had her ups and downs in terms of her marriage. And some of you know all that way more than I just hear what a lot of you folks tell me and what they tell me at the meetup. But she's married, she has a child, she's moved to Nashville, she's getting her career. But in this video, talking to this guy who's Roman Catholic and raised Catholic and then had years of wandering and then came back, etc., etc., she's been reading the Bible every day, exploring God, and her story is very common in terms of the motivational structures. I was having trouble in my life. I thought maybe I'd give God a try. I started reading the Bible. I started praying, and suddenly, in ways that to me felt like the hand of God, things started straightening out in my life. Now, as a pastor, I have a lot to say about that dynamic, but this is not the video for that. And I actually don't want to meddle in individuals' lives in this way right now in something like this, because that is how many, many people begin their exploration of the Christian life and many other lives, So she's looking for divine help with troubles. And again, very, very common. Well, what does she want? Well, she's got a husband. She's got a child. She's got a promising career. I mean, she mentioned in the video that her father and mother are doing better than they have for years. And I that his performance on that Telegraph video was just, I thought he looks good. He sounds good. He sounds healthy. This is wonderful. This is wonderful. But as Jordan Peterson often says, people are always working multiple hierarchies, and climbing those hierarchies is intensely meaningful for us. And so these strugglings with things that she's opening her life up to God for help with, there's lots of different hierarchies she's working on. I mean, she's already married, so now she's got a child who is, I don't know how old the child is, probably late preschool or early grade school age. I haven't been keeping track. But she has a child. Her father's doing better. Her mother's doing better. But she's got a business. She's got a career. She's got a marriage. And marriages are not easy things. And many people have ups and downs in their marriages. And again, if you've got your career, she's got her career, et cetera, et cetera. She's climbing multiple hierarchies. It's intensely meaningful. It's also risky, and so she feels anxiety, and so you look to God, and so you read the Bible, and you develop a life of prayer, and you begin a relationship with the church, and that's usually how it starts. Now, as you go deeper into the life of faith, you sort of get off the God of fixing things now track, and you get into, okay, I'm going to trust you and love you and be faithful to you even if you don't fix this thing. And then you just get into deeper and deeper and deeper registers of Christian commitment into Christian life, into Christian faith. And many of you know that. Marriage doesn't end the climbing. So so you got your master's degree and you're getting all the attention you want. You know, for someone like me who was not a dater in high school at all, very unsuccessful in college for the most part, finally, you know, landed a relationship with an amazing woman later in my college career, and then eventually we married. We've had 5 children together. That little part of the Tinder part and finding each other, that's a tiny, tiny little part. Now, it's hugely consequential because mate selection, boy, that's a big deal. And you hardly know the person you marry when you marry them. And now, being the father of 5 young adult children, you know, parents picking spouses, yeah. If you're wise, you'd ask me for a little bit of more wisdom. But the way the culture is right now, parents have to be very careful and very sly about how we impart wisdom to our children. And a lot of it, you know, people will often ask me, well, how about advice for parenting? Well, be the person you want your children to become. Why don't you start there? Because they will, whatever they're talking, you are imprinting on them. Their first draft, their first mapping is very much from you and your relationship with your spouse, for better and for worse, usually. But marriage doesn't end the climbing, because marriage is sort of, in some ways, just a relief. There's this great scene in Harry Met Sally when, of course, Harry and Sally go on a double date with his best friend and her friend, and then the 2 friends, Bruno Kirby and it's Princess Leia. Can't think of her name right now. But, you know, and Harry and Sally are going up, and they're ups and downs, and they're ups and downs, and they're ups and downs, and those 2 just fall back in bed. Oh, isn't it wonderful we're married? Such a relief to be out of the dating market. And I will trade sex with strangers for stability and a little bit more of a boring sex life if I must. But again, that whole issue of sex within commitment is a whole nother big conversation. So, but what do we really want? Truth is, we want it all, because once we secure the spouse, we learn the upsides and the downsides, and we start working those angles, and then the children come along, and then the career, and what do we really want? Well, the truth is we want everything, because once we actually secure some things, we go on to other hierarchies, and we start working up those, and we do that our whole life long. Now, the video that I made a while ago that I keep coming back to mentally, even though I haven't rewatched it, your God is your frame of frames. Because here's the thing about a frame. A frame is the one thing you won't deconstruct. And the reason that works is because you can't deconstruct everything and see anything, because there's nothing to compare it by. It's, again, like trying to take a picture of a sprinting cheetah when you're in a Jeep moving 50 miles an hour in an open field and the camera's going like this. You'll never stop. You need a frame. Something needs to stop so you can see and focus, and consciousness can do its thing, and memory can do its thing. So you need a frame, and this, of course, is something that they've discovered with artificial intelligence, so on and so forth. Benjamin Boyce's conversation with James Lindsay about, just realized in that, it's the one thing that you won't deconstruct. Maybe it's your experience of oppression. Maybe it's your agenda for feminism. Whatever it is, that becomes your God, your religion. That becomes your frame. It becomes the one thing that you won't change. And what people do over life is, for a long time, especially if they're single, part of how it worked for me as a young Christian who at least had the community celebrated and supported aspiration of trying to reserve at least sexual intercourse and high degrees of sexual intimacy for marriage is a whole nother conversation. Boy, there's a lot of pressure on getting married, and getting married is like, being able to get sex regularly. And so that becomes a huge motivational factor to get married within the context of that community. Again, that whole thing is just gone. And I'm amazed, I've made this point before again. If you watch The Bachelor or those shows, and someone commented, yeah, the one time they had a virgin on The Bachelor, he wound up to be gay. It's like, oh, not a great point for Team Virgin. But anyway, I mean, there's been just total collapse in many Christian communities with respect to this. And in some ways, all the finger pointing at the weird purity people on the other side, well, fair enough. Yeah, that's plenty weird, and I certainly don't recommend it. But, clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right, it's a mess. And you need a frame. And so once people sort of tackle the frame of, okay, I'm married, I've got a partner, we're starting from here, we're going to try to make it work, and then boy, you've got all those other things, and children and career and your sexual needs and her sexual needs and your emotional needs and her emotional needs and housework and money, and I mean it's a big deal. But ideally, you would like a frame that actually scales and works for all of these things, and that's really where God comes in very handy. Every frame within creation is subject to idolatry. For example, if you make getting married the quest of your life, well, you're either going to succeed and then it's going to be passé and you're going to look on for another one. But if you make it your organizing principle, you're going to have problems. Because even if you're unmarried and want to get married, you have to navigate that frame amongst other frames because they're seldom univariable. And so part of the reason the God frame works so well, even just in theory, is it is so global. And this is, again, why I think Christianity with God number one and God number two really works well, because it's God is everything. God covers all of the frames. And so as you're actually working that frame, you switch down and you seek God's will and you seek God's heart and you practice the Christian life and you read the Bible and you go to church and you develop Christian relationships. And I mean, you just keep working all of those problems. And I think over time, that's part of the reason why religious people outperform secular people in many respects. It simply works. You need a frame that encompasses all and that is not subject to decay or corruption or idolatry. You need something outside the system. And God, that's why the God frame doesn't really go away. It's just so enormously useful. And even when people throw it away, then they just start bringing in other words that usually work less well because you don't have anywhere near the resources available to work that frame, like universe. You're going to talk to universe now. Oh, okay. Universe, great spirit. Okay, but the advantage of having God, and especially if you are practicing Christian or even another religion, you at least have a wisdom community around you that you can appropriate. There's just so many more resources. It's sort of like deciding, I'm going to build a computer myself, but I'm not going to order a motherboard from Newegg, and I'm not going to use an Intel processor. I'm going to go out to the beach and design my own chip and make my own motherboard, and I'm going to build the thing from scratch. Wow. Well, good luck. It's a whole lot easier taking stuff off the shelf rather than having to design it all yourself. It's just true. Part of the deceit of some forms of feminism is that women believe heightened masculine types of status will give them all that it gives to men. It does not. Just by virtue of masculinity and femininity and male and female and the way culture is and society is, men gain things from masculine status that women don't. Hey, guess what? Here's the other side. Women gain things from feminine status that men don't. These things aren't going away. They're too deep. And so women want it all. Guess what? So do men. They will have biases and strengths. So will men. They won't compete in masculinity, neither will men compete in femininity, generally speaking, overlapping bell curves, etc., etc. So, what does that mean? Well, you're going to have decisions to make about your life. You're going to look for resources. You're going to look for help. You're going to look for wisdom. Go find it. Go do it. And, of course, I'm a Christian minister, so ask God to help you. Let me know what you think in the comments. Can't wait to read the comments for this one.